I'm J Levine, and I'd like to tell you a story which I think, if you're interested as I am in human development, is very portentous and has a lot of content in it. There's a very famous incident in Pilanesberg, South Africa, some years ago. There's an instance where rhinoceroses in a national park were being found horribly mutilated. They were killed in a very gratuitous and violent manner. And rangers at first were a little bit perplexed and baffled as to why this would be. Rhinoceroses don't really have any predators, and they're quite peaceful creatures in their own right. They certainly don't fight to the death. What they discovered, what in fact was witnessed by tourists, were that this was being carried out by, or these atrocities, if you will, were being carried out by young elephants. Very uncharacteristic of elephants, who themselves are generally peaceable creatures. So here's the story. Here's what was actually happening. The young elephants were orphans. They had been rescued. They'd been taken from circumstances where their parents had been killed for whatever reason, either cold or they'd been taken by poachers. The net result being that they were orphan male elephants. They were taken to the park, Pilanesberg, and they really formed a herd of their own, a particular group of their own. Now, what happened within this was that the elephants matured. They grew up, and as they live on a very, very similar time scale for us, as they entered their teenage years, they started to have the kind of hormonal shifts and changes that we experience ourselves. Or when I say we, I mean obviously human beings, we experience ourselves. So one of the things that was kicking in was testosterone was being released. Now, along with that shift, that hormonal shift, there came obviously the compulsion to procreate. And it was observed eventually that what was happening was that the young bulls were approaching rhinoceroses. Now, the rhinoceroses, understandably, they weren't interested. They rejected the advances that were being made to them by the bull elephants, or the young bull elephants. What happened was that the young males were in such a testosterone or a hormonally charged state that they didn't react well to the rejection from the rhinoceroses. And they took it out on the rhinoceroses, and sadly they actually killed them. Now, what happened after time, the rangers figured that they would introduce some adult bull elephants. Now, what's interesting here is that the line of passage, if you will, from generation to generation had been broken within these orphans. They didn't have role models, they didn't have mentors that they could look up to or who could set the tone. And so what ensued was essentially a state of anarchy. It was lawlessness amongst elephants who are normally very ordered and very specific in their social groupings and their interactions and behaviour with one another. The adult bulls came in to the situation, and what happened, strangely enough, was that very quickly order was restored. There was a balance, a harmony was restored. And what happened in that circumstance was that the young elephants were regulated by what I would call the codings and the frequency that the adult bull elephants operated on. That exerted a controlling and a dominating influence, which brought the young bulls back into line, if you will. Now, what this says is very significant. It's significant for human society. It's also significant for anyone who, like me, is urgent about the business of development and about ascending, about growing, about personal evolution. what it says very clearly is that in the absence of suitable role models or mentors, anarchy ensues. A breakdown in order is the inevitable consequence. And in a situation where there isn't clear, defined leadership or guidance, that also is the case. And this is one of the things which I observe at the moment regarding information. The diaspora of information, which comes without mentorship and without the appropriate guidance. So we are in a very information-rich age, but we are in a guidance-light age. I don't know if you see the difference there. There's lots of information, but there's not much guidance on what to do with that information. So in many respects we have random pockets of information flying about the place, a little bit like unrestrained male elephants, adolescent elephants, and there isn't the cohesive guidance to do something practical with the information. Now, what is significant, what is totally significant and fundamental to this story is the fact that with the introduction of the mentors, the guides, the role models, almost instantaneously, the behaviour that had been unacceptable suddenly became acceptable, mediated itself, and they began to behave in an appropriate manner. That is precisely the situation that we as human beings find ourselves in. Without an appropriate guide, without an appropriate mentor, things can fly off in any number of random directions, but with the guidance that's appropriate, we can enter into a state of comparative emancipation, regulation, and objective progression. That is what I believe all human beings are looking for in their life, irrespective of the discipline that they align themselves to. Whether they are an architect, an artist, a philosopher, a scientist, an IT consultant, a homemaker, it really makes no difference. What does make a difference is progression within that. Progression within that results in fulfillment. Fulfillment brings about a degree of satisfaction. The combination of growth, progression, fulfillment and satisfaction has as its inevitable consequence the residual feeling of happiness, which is something that I feel everybody in their own particular way is pursuing. Thank you very much for the time, and I hope that that story offers something of an insight for you.